Good evening and welcome to Your Money, Your Call. I'm Chris Gray. Tonight on the property edition of Your Money, Your Call, commercial property. Should you be buying or renting? How hard is it to fit out a commercial property, and what are the issues you should be aware of? Now, if you can't afford to buy or fit out, what are some of the alternatives? Now, also on tonight's show, how hard is it to negotiate a commercial lease? Do it yourself or outsource to a professional? What are the traps to avoid, and how to get the best incentives to move in? Now, we've got a panel of experts here to answer your questions. Tonight we're talking to Andrew Holder from TDA Interiors and also Rob Morris from Space Consulting. So if you've got a question about buying, renting or fitting out commercial premises, then give us a call on 1300 30 34 35, or if you prefer, send us an email to property@skynews.com.au. Welcome to the show. Welcome to you guys.
Thanks.
We'll start off with you, Andrew. TDA Interiors, what exactly do you do so the viewers know what questions to ask you?
Sure. Well, we're a commercial fit-out company. We refurbish commercial premises, ranging from offices through to hospitality, healthcare. But probably more than that, we're actually a consultative firm. So I mean, the end product is actually the building. We do the building work, but we try and get involved as early as possible with clients so we can give good advice early on budgets and design and that sort of thing. It's a real jigsaw puzzle when you move an office, so we try and sort of take the headache away.
And so for most people that have renovated their own place, it's always cost twice as much money and it's kind of taken twice as much time. Do a lot of people that don't hire professionals go through the same grief when they're dealing with their commercial premises? Absolutely.
I mean, it's a real minefield. It's full of legislation and statutory information that you need to be aware of. So it's very important you talk to the right sort of people. Otherwise, you're going to spend too much money and it's going to take too long.
Sure. Now, Rob, obviously we have real estate agents that sell properties, we have buyers agents that go and buy for you. Now we have kind of leasing professionals as well. Do you want to explain exactly what you do and I guess why there's a need for the service? Because for most people that rent normal residential, obviously they just sign a lease and that's it.
Yeah, look, my company basically advises tenants and tenants only, and sometimes owner-occupiers. And look, I like to see us as sort of redressing a bit of an imbalance, whereas the big landlords always have big research teams, analytical teams. What I do is provide an independent service, giving them advice and basically giving them the information that the landlords have, and we come at it from their angle. So be it a lease renewal or an exit of a lease, we can provide them with the information that allows them to make an informed decision. And very often there's significant sums of money at stake with a commercial lease, even for a small business. So we like to make sure that we're adding value to the whole process in an independent way.
Because I guess for some small businesses that may be watching and they're looking at taking out like a retail space, like a move into shopping centres, and they've got to deal with a massive business like a Westfield or something with all the corporate lawyers, it must be pretty daunting.
Yeah, look, and we hear that a lot. I mean, people do often say, my landlord doesn't actually give me a lot of respect, and we don't have an awful lot of choices. They put an offer to us, and really, what can we do but say yes? And there's a lot of options out there, and there's lots of angles and negotiation tactics that a tenant can actually adopt to get the best for them for the whole length of a lease. So it's the message for tenants is don't be daunted when you're dealing with big landlords, but you do need expert advice.
And hiring professionals such as yourself, it is for the small business as well as the big professional businesses as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The smaller businesses, understandably, to bring an independent advisor in, it can be a little hard financially, but the savings are still there even for a small occupier. For the medium to large tenants, obviously talking lots more money, more space, more risk. So the way of countering the risk is to get professional advice. So and we see a mix of clients across the whole of the industry as everyone occupies commercial property and business.
And I guess a question for both of you then, with residential property, it's always been in our blood to always own your own home, to kind of pay it off, to not rent. Rent money's dead money. What would you both say is the pros and cons of buying versus renting when it comes to commercial, say for your own businesses? So start off with you, Andrew.
Well, I think one of the obvious ones is that you're obviously limiting your growth. If you're buying your own premises, then your business is growing, you're not going to be able to sustain the growth in the premises you buy. So that's probably the most important one. I think the other thing probably to say is you've got massive capital outlay if you're buying a strata floor, if you're buying commercial property, whereas if you're leasing space, the outlay is a little bit less. If you're a small business, that's a big issue for you.
And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think even on that issue, even on a fit-out issue, if you're buying commercial space, it's yours. You've got to pay for everything. You know, nuts and bolts of fit-out. It's all your cost. If you're leasing space, very much that fit-out cost is going to be borne in part by an incentive negotiated. So there's significant savings there if you do lease. You know, it's an interesting scenario, but I honestly don't see that many of my clients buying space at the moment. The risk of tying yourself into an asset that probably you can't get rid of that quickly is too high for most companies, in my view.
Yeah, it's funny you both say that, because I get a lot of clients coming to me, and just in general kind of speaking and talking to people about this kind of stuff, then a lot of people say, oh look, I've started my business, I've got a mortgage broking firm or whatever it is, and I've bought my commercial premises. And it's exactly what you say, is like if you're, say, a small business, you're either going to grow really, really quickly or it's not going to work at all. And to be tied into a property that you've got a fixed limited space is pretty tough, because it's hard for any of our business to know what we're going to be like in 5 years' time.
Exactly. Yeah.
So do you see people kind of buying properties and then outgrowing them straight away, and then thinking, well, we spend all this money and what do we do now?
Well, I think a lot of people buy premises because they see it as an asset they can sit on, and I suppose, you know, then they move out of the premises, they may move to lease space and then lease the space back to somebody else. So I think that, you know, if you're looking at it as an asset, it's a different story, I suppose, but as a place to occupy, as a business home, you know, it has those restrictions, as we said.
Yeah. Now, Rob, coming through the GFC, and we don't really touch too much on commercial property around here. Do you want to give me an idea of how you see the commercial market, both from, I guess, a capital appreciation or depreciation over the last few years, but also from the renter's perspective as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, from a renter's perspective, I'll answer that first. I mean, it's definitely a good time to be a tenant in the market. I mean, as with businesses that have been hit hard and have probably relinquished a bit of space, those landlords out there are also suffering and are trying to fill their buildings. So, you know, whereas it might not be a very healthy situation business-wise, certainly last year, it's also not for the landlord. So tenants need to play on that and negotiate hard, because no matter what your landlord tells you, he's not going to want to see you go. So, you know, last year was tough. I think this year already is seeing some positive signs. Encouragingly, most companies are now talking about expansion, growing, and actually out in the market looking for more space. So I think you know, what we're seeing is we're through that GFC process. People are less cautious now. Interesting enough, that the big corporates are the ones that are the slow movers, because they're obviously more impacted by the international markets, whereas the smaller businesses are a little bit more nimble, and they're in the market, and they're pushing landlords hard now. Look, I guess on the capital appreciation side, it boils down to exactly that same equation. If I'm a major landlord and I'm sitting on an asset and I'm losing tenants, you know, my income's going down, my capital value's falling. So I think from that side, the landlords need to work more with the tenants, and they will do over the coming 12 months, I think, to fill their buildings.
Because certainly one of the disadvantages about buying commercial from an investor's perspective is these long gaps in tenancies, isn't it?
That's right, yeah. Look, I think you can have an empty building, or you know, 6 months is fairly common sometimes to have an empty space. Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned incentives quite a few times. Can you explain, for those people that haven't touched on commercial before, what those incentives really mean? Yeah,
look, I mean, normally the landlord will put an incentive into a deal. Basically, an incentive is you know, an additional sum of money to lure either that tenant from another building into theirs, or into their building from a fresh. So that sometimes takes the form of a cash incentive, which the landlord will give to the tenant. Sometimes they'll put it towards a fit out. Sometimes they'll put it towards rent abatement over the term. And it varies. I mean, in the Sydney CBD market at the moment, obviously we're in Sydney, so we can talk about that. You know, the CBD for a 5-year term is probably running at sort of 20 to 25% incentive. So, you know, on a 5-year lease, you're getting a year's rent free, and most tenants aren't aware of that. That finishing position very often isn't the starting position from a landlord, I have to say. So they're aware of where the market is, but it's basically an encouragement, and it's affected by supply and demand, really.
And so certainly if you're talking about rent-free periods of around, say, 12 months or so, yeah, that's when bringing a professional on, say, such as yourself, that's when it's got to be worth it, because if you're completely unaware of those things and you can be getting tens of thousands of dollars in, it'll make quite a difference, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the difference we see from if the tenant comes to us and says, here's an offer the landlord's given us, what do you think, we're just about to sign, to if we get some involvement and we can actually negotiate and restructure the lease for them and build in different incentives, the difference is fairly significant at the end of the day. The landlord has that money to give them. If you don't know which buttons to push, they're not going to offer it. So professional advice is the way to go.
Yeah. Now, Andrew, you're in the business of obviously kind of moving people around and doing the fit-outs. So if someone's in a stable position within their existing premises, how much of a hassle is it for them to literally move down the road and find a new office and have to fit it out? Is there enormous things involved?
Yes, indeed, there is. I mean, there's a multitude of things. You know, it's a massive disruption for any business. I think the thing you really got to look at is, when does the lease expire on your current premises? If the lease is, you know, expiring very soon, you've got to make some fast moves to get out. Certainly, it's an easier exercise than trying to refurbish your existing space, where, you know, bringing builders in to work around, you know, your working environment can be very difficult. So, at least if you're taking a new premises, you can then, you know, fit it out and move in brand new. Just touching on what Rob was just talking about, the incentive issue. During the last 2 years, it's been very interesting. The incentives that have been offered from the landlords has actually almost matched the fit-out costs for the tenant going in. So what's been happening is that tenants have been trying to make the move cost neutral by using the incentive money up front to then pay for the fit-outs.
So there's obviously some pretty big numbers involved then with these things. Because, I mean, typically, what are the range of fit-outs? Maybe it's like a piece of string, but roughly what are people paying on fit-outs?
Well, again, I mean, the GFC's certainly brought those numbers down. You know, typically we would expect between $1,000 to $1,500 per square metre for a fit-out. Pre-GFC, $1,500 per square metre would be a typical fit-out for a legal firm or accountancy firm. You know, people that generally have a little bit more money to spend. But since the GFC period, you know, most fit-outs are really under the $1,000 per square metre mark. So if you're taking, you know, 500 square metres, it's a $500,000 outlay. Yeah.
And you're talking about square metres. Is that how everything is measured in? Because in residential, you don't generally talk about the square meterage. Is everything to do with commercial by the square metre, pretty much?
Well, everything's ordered and measured and bought on a square metre basis. The square metre weight rates I've just been talking about really apply to office premises of probably 200 square metres plus. Under that level, the square metre rates of spend don't quite apply, because obviously you're moving to smaller premises that don't need the sort of infrastructure that a larger building would.
Yeah. And when it comes to actually paying the rental, again, what are some of the ranges that you might pay for square meterage from something with, say, a harbour view to something that's kind of down in the dungeons?
Yeah, just use the CBD again. I mean, the CBD, top-end premium grade buildings, harbour views, probably looking at $1,200 to $1,300 a square metre at the very, very top end, down to probably, you know, a CD grade building you might get for $250, $300 a square metre. So there's a huge range. And it very much depends on the type of business you're in as to where you enter the market. And obviously the big end corporates at the very high end of the market. But as a start-up business or a small business, then there's still opportunities to get into the market.
Sure. And we'll go into some more detail in the next few minutes. Now, we'll be back in just a moment with Tip of the Week and more questions and ideas on property.